So my name's Tom Watson. I'm a pottery researcher based in Dundee. I came up with the idea for the GCA projects when I was doing my master's degree. Just to prove that two pottery types were indeed distinct from each other, I compared their colours and broke it down to its RGB code, which eventually helped me prove a point. But I thought this technique could potentially be widened to be used as an archaeological tool. I brainstormed a few ideas with Anne Jenner at Yatt's Pottery department, and then I subsequently sent her a design for a light chamber, which was designed to produce photographs of different pottery types under the same lighting conditions, so they could be then compared to each other. So we put the idea forward to Yatt's Resilience Fund, who allocated us some money to kind of experiment with this idea, develop the technique a bit more, and to produce the light chamber, all under the title of the GCA Project. GCA meaning Glazed Colour Analysis. So in terms of design, it was first produced as a 2D mock-up, which I then transferred and fleshed out a bit on a 3D design program. On the program, it looked a little bit different to how it does today, but the basic things are still there. Initially, it had what looked like a view frame, but after some testing, we found that this obscured the shot, so it was ditched. It was designed initially with the idea that it would be entirely 3D printed. But after a discussion with Dundee University, we decided that MDF would be a better option, and so it was redesigned to allow for some more traditional carpentry fittings. In terms of construction, we produced the thing out of MDF slabs or panels, which were then subjected to a rotating drill bit, just to get the grooves in and some of the finer things for construction that would have taken a lot longer by hand. Construction was significantly delayed by the snowfall in March by about 2 weeks, which pushed everything in the project back. Once it was completed, overall it's about 90% MDF, 7% 3D printed, and 3% PVC. A big part of the light chamber is its electronics, so we had to wire up a relatively simple circuit with one relatively complicated bit of tech, which is the voltage regulator. This is designed to keep the lights at a constant level as the batteries die, meaning that any samples we take using the chamber are all standardized. This is fed by a battery pack, and these both then feed into a set of LED lights stuck on the inside of the chamber. Towards the end of the manufacturing process, we did an initial test just to make sure everything was running correctly. We found that because the chamber is designed to fit my smartphone, because it's the only camera I own, that the camera on the phone was being a bit too smart by adjusting for the light levels in the chamber by itself. This would mean that some images are darker than others depending on the size or color of the sherd, which isn't really what we're after. So 4 tests were designed to both correct this issue and to prove that the technique was now at least somewhat working. So the first test we did was called the camera test, which was designed to resolve the camera issue by testing 4 different camera settings on the phone against 6 different sherds of various sizes and colors, and seeing which of these camera settings was the most consistent throughout. The second test we did was the background test, just to see which background was the most consistent that the sherd was placed on, similar to the last test. The third test was something we call the watertight test, just to see whether any exterior light was entering the chamber. This involved taking photographs using the chamber on, off and covered from 4 a.m. until 11 p.m. just to get differing light levels during the day. And the last test was the grouping test, which involves gathering as many different varieties of pottery sherds as possible and analysing them using the chamber as designed, just to see whether the technique was now working a bit better. So in terms of results, the camber test did produce a setting that we think is relatively consistent. It might be something to look at again in the future, but for now we're quite happy. The background test, though it's not this background, we did find one that is actually very consistent with any sherd we put in there. So it could be a large white one or a small black one, it will produce pretty much the same colour tone for the background. The watertight test, there was a little bit of light entering the chamber as the results showed. But with the chamber turned on, this was negligible, because covered or uncovered, the results were pretty much the same. In fact, uncovered actually produced a couple of spikes we're not happy with, so we're going to leave it as is at the moment. And the grouping test, although we didn't have the results for the background test at the time, the results of the grouping test were relatively encouraging, producing statistics that showed some significant differences between the different types. So in terms of results, the camera test did produce a setting we're quite happy with. It may be something we need to revisit in the future, but for the moment there was producing relatively consistent photographs. Same with the background test. That one was a bit more conclusive, although it's not this background. One of the backgrounds, which looks a bit like kind of Nelly the elephant, was producing a relatively consistent colour tone throughout. In terms of the watertight test, we did find that some exterior light was entering the chamber when the chamber was turned off, but if it was turned on, as opposed to when it was covered or uncovered, the results were pretty much the same. So we're quite happy to leave the chamber as it is at the moment. In terms of the grouping test, we didn't actually have the background test completed at that point, but the results were quite encouraging, producing a lot of distinct groups from each other. And some statistics performed on this test does show some significant differences that way. So in terms of future tests, we have a few planned, mostly just to get the results from the grouping tests, or the bubbles you'll see in them, reduced down to size, making each pottery ware a bit more distinct from each other, and therefore a bit more useful to archaeologists. Though again, this technique isn't being marketed as a product, it's just to see whether this technique would work as a product. In terms of future plans, based on these results, once we're happy, we will need to essentially automate the process, because at the moment it takes far too long just to do it all manually. So the idea is to bring a coder in, just to make a program that once you take a photograph, it can process everything very easily and instantly compare it to a database, which will make it instantly much more user-friendly and a lot more useful to anyone in the heritage sector. If you want to find any more information about the project, any videos, results, posters, you can visit gcaproject.wordpress.com.